21-year-old Bethany and Decker was full of life. Her mother, Kim, described her as a joy to be around, always positive and smiling since birth. Bethany had two younger siblings who looked up to her as the leader, confident, encouraging, and supportive. After excelling in school for years, she was accepted into George Mason University, where she aimed to earn a degree in global and economic change. One of her roommates recalled how Bethany could procrastinate on assignments until the last minute, but still managed to write an essay in an hour and earn an A-star. She was incredibly intelligent, they remembered. It was during her freshman year that Bethany met Emil Decker, a cadet in the Reserve Officers Training Corps, who was set to join the Army National Guard. Emil was a romantic at heart, and Bethany's family recalled how he would remember even the smallest, most insignificant details she mentioned and make an effort to act on them. They loved him, and he easily became part of the family, as if they'd been together forever. After dating for a couple of years, Emil proposed. Not long after their engagement, Bethany discovered she was pregnant. The young couple was thrilled to start their family together. Though the baby came sooner than expected, it was a welcome surprise. They named their son Kai. However, family and friends noted that the stress of a newborn, combined with their financial struggles, quickly became overwhelming. While Emil started training with the Army National Guard units, Bethany, who was still studying at George Mason, took up a part-time job in a restaurant to get some more money. The stress only mounted further when Emil started prepping to be deployed to Afghanistan. Between both their families helping out, the pair were just about coping. But knowing Emil would soon be away for long periods of time was hard for Bethany to deal with. She said she felt like the pair were drifting apart and they were living in two completely separate worlds. She told Emil she worried they had rushed into things and should have taken more time to plan. Some sources say at this point they decided to try a separation and take a break. Emil was upset but wanted to give Bethany what she needed. As he left the country, Bethany moved into a new apartment so she could be closer to her job and pick up as many shifts as possible. One day at the restaurant, things would take a massive shift, which changed the course of everything. Bethany met 31-year-old Ronald Rolen, who was originally from Bolivia. Before long, the pair were involved in a romantic relationship. Bethany told friends she was lonely and isolated with Emil being overseas for such long periods of time. And despite her friends' reservations, Ronald soon moved into Bethany's apartment. Her best friend Sarah said she was shocked and warned her against it, but she ultimately wanted to see Bethany happy and Bethany was going to do what she wanted to anyway. She and Emil were still separated and communication was dwindling, but he could sense something was going on. The relationship with Ronald was bad from the get-go. He was controlling, jealous, and violent, and everyone saw it in him. Kim said she was frightened, hearing horror stories about what was going on inside the apartment. She even suspected that Ronald had hurt Kai, as Kai not only seemed scared of him, but he had a black eye on one occasion. The story they were told was that a friend was watching him and he fell backwards off of a chair, but Bethany's family were not so sure. They also found out that Ronald had phoned Kai's daycare and pretended to be Emil. Fortunately, the daycare could tell something was wrong and nothing happened. But this resulted in them setting up a code to use over the phone, so they knew not to answer to Ronald if he called again. Ronald would text and call constantly asking to see proof of where she was and who she was with. He would even follow her to houses she said she was going to just to make sure she actually was, and then he would sit and wait for her outside until she left. Bethany was now in a very bad situation and decided to come clean and tell Emil everything, saying she knew she had made a mistake. Emil still wanted to make things work, saying his family was his priority. He said he could tell that something had been wrong for many months, as she was now working about 6 days a week and barely talking to him. And when she did communicate, she was distant and not present. Bethany and Emil decided to go on holiday when he was home on leave to try and patch things up. Their marriage was hanging by a thread at this point, and the situation was messy to say the least. She was telling her mother and friends that the situation with Ronald was now so bad. She needed to either get him out somehow or leave the apartment herself in secret. She and Kim started working on a plan to make this happen. As 2010 came to an end, Emil sent a sweet message to his young family. In mid-January 2011, He was granted leave, and the pair decided they would still go on holiday together. As Bethany met him at the airport, it was clear there was another issue to contend with. Bethany was pregnant again, and Ronald was the father. Emil said he wasn't angry and still wanted the holiday in Hawaii to go ahead. He said, "I'd been overseas and it was a completely different world. Coming back to the United States, I was just happy to be home, to be alive, to be with my family. That anything else in the whole entire world really did not matter to me at all. It was definitely a make or break trip. And by all accounts, they did have a lovely time in Hawaii. It was the most they'd seen each other, laughed together, and just talked in ages. Felt like things could start to get back on track." When Emil and Bethany got back on the January 28th, Bethany visited her grandma. They had a nice afternoon making pizza and talking about the trip, but her grandma said she could tell there were more stories than Bethany was sharing. She was so young with so much going on, and everything was clearly getting on top of her. Bethany later confided that she was drowning in stress, guilt, and sadness, and it was the lowest she had felt in her whole life. Later that night, Emil joined them for dinner where the crisis talks continued. Without warning, Bethany's phone started to go off. She grabbed her things and rushed out, saying they didn't understand what was going to happen to her if she didn't go home. Emil was due back in just a few days, and although the break had been good for them, it still wasn't clear how things would be once he left. Bethany drove back to her apartment as Emil packed up, ready to fly out on the February 2nd. The plan was she would meet him at the airport to see him off, telling him, "I will always be there no matter what." On February 2nd, Emil arrived at the airport hoping to see Bethany there, but she didn't turn up. He called her restaurant and they said she hadn't been into work for the last few days. Before he boarded, he called around Bethany's family to give them the heads up that something seemed wrong. Regardless of any issues the pair ever had, Bethany was always at the airport to see him go. Over the next few days, friends and family tried to make contact with Bethany, but she didn't answer her phone once. Bethany's mother Kim then received a few strange phone calls which remain undisclosed, and Bethany's friend Sarah got some Facebook messages that stood out immediately. She logged in and saw that Bethany was online. Having not heard from her in a while, she started up a chat in Messenger. She said she knew right away. It was not Bethany sending the messages back. The English was broken, words were misspelled, and basic things she would have been able to answer, she couldn't. Sarah called Kim and told her her suspicions. Emil also got an email from Bethany's account, and he too said he didn't believe his wife had typed it. By this point, Kim had received messages from 4 different people, all saying they thought Bethany's Facebook account had been hacked into. Bethany's grandparents live closer to Bethany than Kim, so they decided to drive over to her complex. They found Bethany's car parked outside. It was at an odd angle with a flat tire. This was even more odd because no one had seen her car there before this point. It seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. They knocked on the door, but the silence was deafening. They called 911 on February 19th and reported her missing. Bethany's family said it was not unusual for her to go several days without talking to anyone or replying. And before they all knew it, it was 3 weeks later. Given the fact she hadn't seen or spoken to anyone during this time, as well as being pregnant, authorities did not miss a beat and moved quickly, concerned they had already lost a lot of time. A quick search of her phone, credit and debit cards showed they had not been accessed since January 29th. She hadn't shown up to any of her classes. She hadn't checked herself into any of the nearby hospitals. She hadn't gone into work, and given the fact her passport was at home, she hadn't left the country either. When police went to her apartment, they determined there were no signs of any forced entry or a struggle, and nothing appeared to be glaringly out of place. Her belongings were all still there, indicating she hadn't packed up to go anywhere either. There was nothing inside her car that indicated foul play or pointed to where she might have gone. It was now the first week of March, and detectives decided to hold a press conference. Divers were searching the waters, canine units were around the fields, and the FBI were brought in too. Police were getting leads, but they were going nowhere. None of these tips came to anything. It seemed that the last person to have seen Bethany, given the timeline they knew, was Emil. He was granted permission to fly home and help with the investigation. He voluntarily took a polygraph test and underwent hours of interrogation, answering everything twice over, and was completely supportive of everything the police needed. He said he had absolutely nothing to do with Bethany being missing, and even despite all their issues, his mind was racing and he was deeply concerned. He said he understood why he was being looked at so closely. He happened to leave the country around the same time she went missing, and had just found out she was pregnant with another man's child. But he said he let the police ask everything they needed to, no matter how painful the questions were, so they could rule him out and he could start helping. All of his movements in between the January 28th and the February 2nd were all accounted for as well. Authorities had to consider the possibility that given all of her stresses, she had just wanted a total break and had dipped off the radar. But going this long without talking to her mother and grandmother, and without seeing Kai, was definitely not the Bethany they knew. The police were still treating her disappearance as a missing persons case and not anything more sinister. They didn't identify anyone as a suspect, calling it premature and saying they wanted to encourage the public to keep looking for her without putting anything into their heads. There was, however, one more person they needed to talk to, Ronald Rolen. He was no longer living in the apartment and they had found him at his parents' house. He told them he had moved out recently as the relationship had come to an end. His story actually informed the detectives that he was the last person to see her. Whereas Emil had last seen her on the January 28th, Ronald said he saw her on the afternoon of January 29th. He said she was in the apartment and she seemed her usual self. This was partly corroborated by the manager, who said that she had called in just after 2 p.m. on January 29th to get her next shifts for the week. She also confirmed her shift for that night, but she never showed up to work it. Ronald said he hadn't reported her disappearance as now the relationship was over. He naturally just hadn't had any communication with her to even realize she was missing. ATM records showed that he left Bethany's apartment the afternoon she was last seen and made a withdrawal from his bank at 4:26 p.m. He then returned to the apartment after getting a text from his girlfriend Danielle, with whom he shared 2 children. Ronald sent 2 messages to Bethany, one at 4 o'clock and 1:02 p.m. and one at 4:31 p.m. to tell her he would be staying with his children at their apartment. But it was confirmed that after Bethany contacted work at 2 o'clock and 8 seconds p.m., her phone had no activity. Whether these messages were received is still unknown, but it appeared he had been trying to get hold of her. Danielle said she did drop the children with him at about 4:30 p.m. and Ronald told her he wasn't sure if Bethany would be coming back as the couple had had a fight and she'd taken off. When Danielle returned a few days later, Ronald told her he hadn't seen or heard from Bethany since that day. A search warrant was now issued for his apartment, but this turned up nothing. His computer, phone, and hard drives were all seized, but they drew a blank here as well. A quick background check on Ronald found he did have history with the police, but at this point there was absolutely nothing to link him to Bethany's disappearance. Given the fact that detectives now knew he was the last person to see her, he was considered a person of interest but not a suspect. Bethany's story was now national news, made even more intriguing for journalists when it got out that she had been married to a man that they had interviewed and was having a baby with another man, who was now a potential person of interest. May 2011 would be the month Bethany was due to give birth, and detectives issued another press release contacting hospitals to see if she had checked in anywhere. Again, they were met with silence. The months would soon turn into years and time was slipping by. Police were still no further forward than when they had started. But in May 2012, a new detective was assigned to the case, and the family said they were hopefully fresh eyes that could help them. On this particular year, what would have been Bethany's 23rd birthday coincided with Mother's Day, and family and friends gathered to spread awareness and share stories. Emil and Kai were also in attendance. Kim even connected with the Harrington family, who lost their daughter Morgan in 2009, a case we actually covered on the channel a while ago. They cut a big cake for Bethany, made in her favorite color, orange. In late 2012, Investigation Discovery aired an episode of their show Disappeared, dedicated to Bethany's case, which gave it more attention but still no answers. As time continued to pass, the tips and leads became few and far between, and focuses on other investigations had to take priority. Emil eventually filed for divorce from Bethany and was given sole custody of their son Kai. Everything remained pretty quiet until November 2014, when a completely separate 911 call would shine a whole new light on the case. On November 12, 2014, police in North Carolina responded to a shocking call. It was almost 2 a.m., and it appeared to be a very serious domestic incident. A woman called Vicky said she had shot her boyfriend twice in self-defense when he had attacked her. Out of nowhere, he had walked up behind her, grabbed her by her hair, and snapped her neck. Breaking it in 2 places, he then started punching and biting her. Despite being in what must have been immense pain, Vicky managed to grab her gun and shoot him twice. He then snatched the gun off her and shot her 3 times, once in the head. She still managed to crawl out of the house all the way to a neighbor's home. Her neighbor locked the doors, grabbed his gun, and called 911. Vicky's boyfriend was none other than Ronald Rolen. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder. Although much to Vicky's anger, the attempted murder charge was dropped as he entered a plea deal. He was sentenced to a minimum of 6 years. And after completing his sentence, he was scheduled to be transferred into the custody of U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, who would start the process of deporting him back to Bolivia. Vicky told authorities that Ronald had said he could make people disappear. A friend had even called Vicky and said that she had seen a Nancy Grace episode about Bethany's case, which named Ronald as a person of interest. Vicky confronted him and said his reaction terrified her. She knew something was wrong, but he now knew that she knew about Bethany, and she said the violence had escalated since that point. Vicky said if he was ever let out of prison, he would either come back to kill her or kill someone else. He was clearly a very dangerous and violent individual, and given everything Vicky had told them, he needed to be looked at once again in relation to Bethany's case. Vicky went on to tell her story on Dr. Phil. She had lost an eye because of him, her neck had been broken in 2 places, and she was facing financial ruin due to the cost of the medical bills. But she was determined to keep telling her story and help the police build their case. She contacted Kim personally to tell her everything she knew and offer her support. The pair would strike up a close friendship, meeting for the first time on an episode of True Crime Daily. Investigators also found out that before he was seeing Vicky, Ronald was dating a waitress called April. She had pressed charges against him too when he pushed her down a flight of stairs, spat on her, and threw all her belongings outside. He agreed to pay her $2,500 and the charges were eventually dropped. Detectives working on Bethany's case made the journey over to his new prison to interview him again, but he was verbally abusive, shouting and swearing at them, refusing to talk. This only spurred them on more. Through his lawyer, Ronald maintained he had nothing to do with Bethany's disappearance. He said he was hopeful that Bethany would come home and was praying for her safe return. In March 2019, investigators said there had now been positive movement in Bethany's case. They didn't specify the developments, but they did say it came after a search warrant of Bethany's Facebook account was finally issued and analyzed. The search warrant had been signed by Detective Michael Boone, a man who was actually instrumental in solving the murders of Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington. Morgan Harrington's family had become close to Kim, offering her a support system. Over the next year and into 2020, things again went quiet and the police didn't share anything with the media, keeping all their cards close to their chests. They were on the cusp of a huge break. November 2020. The news everyone had been waiting for almost a decade finally broke. The information that had pushed this forward showed that Bethany and Ronald's individual Facebook accounts were both accessed many times from the same IP address in the days around her disappearance. Ronald Rolen was finally arraigned on abduction charges. And just 1 month later, the charge was upgraded to second-degree murder in the case of Bethany and Decker. Prosecutors said the circumstantial evidence was very strong and it was a solid case. Ronald's lawyers asked for bail, but the judge said there was no way. He pleaded not guilty and his trial was scheduled to start in August 2021, but this was pushed back to February 2022. The trial was then set back a final time when the county sheriff's office released a further 60,000 files against Ronald, and his defense team needed more time to go through everything. The new trial would be January 30th, 2023, and this date would mark just a day after the 12-year anniversary of Bethany's disappearance. Everyone now just had to sit, wait, and continue to be patient just a little bit longer. However, no trial would commence. In November 2022, 41-year-old Ronald Rolen pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. As part of his plea agreement, he was asked to say what had happened that day. Ronald claimed they had got into an argument in the apartment and he pushed her. She fell and hit her head on the windowsill and died instantly. Too scared to call 911, he put her body into a large bag and dumped her into the trash compactor at the complex. He still denied using her Facebook account and maintained his story of it being accidental, and he panicked. Given his history of abuse and violence, police and experts doubt his claims of it being unintentional and a total accident. And his denial of accessing her accounts had also long been proven to be false. In February 2023, Ronald was given 12.5 years. He was actually sentenced to 40 years, which was the maximum. However, all but 12.5 were suspended due to his plea deal. He could still serve more time if he commits another crime or violates the conditions of his release. Through all the hearings, Kim and Vicky sat together and watched as he was sentenced. Bethany's family said they were angry that he will only be in prison a few months longer than they had spent searching for her. But they said they were grateful they finally had some sort of closure. So many lives have been affected by this case, and it was a long and painful wait for answers. To this day, Bethany's remains have never been found, and police feel it is unlikely they ever will be. Kim said all she can do is keep Bethany's memory alive and encourage people to be vocal and tell loved ones you care about them, because you just never know what will happen. She continues to work with Help Save the Next Girl, a national non-profit organization founded by Morgan Harrington's parents in her honor. It's a way of educating and spreading awareness by talking about safety and violence prevention. She said, "The night before Bethany was murdered, she called me and said, 'Mom, I love you.' That was the last thing she said. So I just want to encourage each and every one of you to not take for granted tomorrow and to really make sure that you are talking to your loved ones, that you're letting people know how much you care and not wait for the tomorrow, which may never be." Discover the chilling world of secret crime mysteries, where we delve into the most perplexing cold cases and unsolved crimes. Join us as we unravel hidden clues and explore haunting mysteries. Subscribe now and be part of the journey to bring these cases to light. 67-year-old Leslie Ann Jones resided in Oak Park, Illinois, with her 69-year-old husband, Thomas Johnson. The couple had first met in 1975 while working at the nonprofit organization, the Legal Assistance Foundation, now known as Legal Aid Chicago. Both Leslie and Tom were graduates of Harvard Law School and became partners at the law firm Johnson, Jones, Snelling, Gilbert, and Davis, which Tom established in 1984. Tom earned his bachelor's degree from American University, while Leslie held a bachelor's degree in economics from Yale University and an MBA from the University of Chicago. Leslie was passionate about the arts and enjoyed a variety of related hobbies, including knitting, ink painting, and screen printing. She taught an ethics class at Northwestern University and specialized in healthcare, civil rights, and real estate law at the firm. In his legal career, Tom worked on a variety of cases important to him because of his sense of justice and ethics. He had fought for and secured compensation for minors suffering from black lung disease, worked for bail reform in Cook County, and spent decades working for fair and affordable housing in the Chicago area. He was also very involved with politics, serving as chief counsel for several mayoral campaigns. Beginning in 1991, Tom served as a hearing officer for the Chicago Police Board, ultimately overseeing more than 350 administrative disciplinary cases in which Chicago police officers were accused of misconduct. Several of the cases he oversaw were high-profile and controversial. In 2019, he had overseen hearings for 4 officers who had lied during the course of the investigation into the fatal police shooting of teenager Laquan McDonald in 2014. The officers were ultimately fired from the department as a result of the hearings. Both Leslie and Tom were supporters of civil rights causes who spend much of their professional and personal lives working for the disadvantaged. They were also actively involved in various charities. Leslie worked with the Oak Park Area Arts Council and Hephzibah Children's Association, and Tom was active as a coach with local youth baseball programs, frequently providing support and guidance to children from single-parent households. Tom and Leslie took in numerous foster children over the years. In April of 2020, relatives of the couple began to worry when they could not get a hold of Tom and Leslie for a period of 4 days. The last time they had heard from either of them was around 7 p.m. on April 9th. They did not live in the area, however, so they could not go to Tom and Leslie's home to look for them. They therefore contacted the couple's 20-year-old godson, who lived nearby, and asked him to go over to the house to check on them. He arrived at the home around 7:30 p.m. on April 13th. When he arrived, he found the front door closed but unlocked. When he went inside, he saw Leslie's body, face down and dressed in a nightgown on the stairs. Tom's body would be found upstairs in the couple's bedroom. Their godson immediately called the police, and paramedics were sent straight to the scene. Unfortunately, a doctor from Loyola University Medical Center pronounced both Leslie and Tom dead at 7:47. The couple left behind 4 adult sons. Their autopsies would show that Leslie and Tom had both been stabbed to death. Leslie had been stabbed 34 times in her head, chest, shoulder, and arms, and Tom had been stabbed 17 times in his head, neck, and shoulders. It appeared as though the attack began upstairs in the couple's bedroom, and Leslie had attempted to escape before being caught by the killer. Leslie and Tom's dog was found wounded but alive in the home. According to authorities, paw prints from the dog and footprints from the offender were visible in blood inside the house. There were no signs of forced entry. Police asked for anyone in the neighborhood with surveillance cameras to turn their footage over. Robbery did not appear to be a motive in the crime, as the house was not ransacked and nothing appeared to be missing. Tom's wallet was found on the floor of the bedroom, its contents scattered around it. Since both Leslie and Tom were so active in so many areas and with so many organizations in both their personal and professional lives, there were countless associations authorities had to investigate looking for potential motives in the crime. On October 9, 2020, 2 local activists, Raul Montes Jr. and Varen Coconade, announced that they were offering a $5,000 reward for information leading to the identification and conviction of Tom and Leslie's killer or killers. They also called for the Cook County State's Attorney to become involved in the case and for local law enforcement to work with federal agencies to further the investigation. On February 2, 2021, Oak Park Police Chief LaDawn Reynolds released a video statement assuring the community that the investigation into Leslie and Tom's murders was a top priority to his department and was receiving support from the West Suburban Major Crimes Task Force, the Illinois State Police, the FBI, and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Because the couple lived in a large 3-story house, they had an extensive crime scene that needed to be meticulously examined. There was a large amount of evidence from the scene that the Illinois State Police Crime Lab was still processing. Because discussing specific details about evidence or leads could compromise the investigation, detailed information about the ongoing investigative efforts could not be released to the public. The case remains unsolved, but the investigation is ongoing. 19-year-old Lisa Greery was a graduate of Mesa High School who sang at her church and worked for Salt River Project Power and Water. She had a cheerful and energetic personality and hoped to one day use those qualities in her dream career as a wedding planner. Lisa lived in an apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona with her boyfriend, Brandon Rumbaugh. 20-year-old Brandon was a student at Arizona State University and worked as a personal trainer at a gym in Mesa, where he developed a dedicated client base. He planned to one day open a gym of his own. He could play numerous instruments, including the trumpet, trombone, and saxophone, and had performed as a Latin and swing dancer. He joined the United States Marine Corps Reserves in July of 2001, but was discharged after a year due to knee problems. Once they began dating after meeting in a nightclub, Lisa and Brandon were inseparable. According to mother, Paula, Brandon treated Lisa like a queen. In October of 2003, the couple was preparing to celebrate their 1-year anniversary. They had originally hoped to go on a trip to Disneyland but could not afford it. Instead, they decided to go on a 1-night camping trip so that they could recreate their first date and go stargazing. Lisa asked her mother, Paula, if she could borrow her 2000 white Ford F-150 pickup for the trip. The truck was due for an oil change, and Paula was concerned about Lisa and Brandon using it when it was not in perfect working order. She was also concerned about the trip because Lisa had never been camping before, but ultimately decided to let the couple borrow the vehicle. Camping trip because she knew he would also be worried about her safety. On October 17, 2003, Brandon and Lisa left for their overnight trip. When Lisa picked the truck up from her mother, Paula gave her a hug and told her to be careful. She reminded Lisa to take extra blankets and told her she could call her if she needed anything. The trip was only going to be for one night because Brandon was scheduled to work on Saturday, 18th. He never arrived as scheduled, which immediately raised concerns. Brandon and Lisa's loved ones were not sure of the exact spot where they were planning to spend the night and began searching potential camping locations. On Sunday, October 19th, a group of their friends located the white pickup truck in a secluded dirt parking lot on Bumblebee Road near Bumblebee Camp, 2 miles from Interstate 17 north of Phoenix. Lisa and Brandon's bodies were in their sleeping bags in the bed of the truck. They had both been shot multiple times with bullets from a .25 caliber handgun, a relatively uncommon weapon. Based on their positions when they were found, it appeared Brandon had been killed first while he was sleeping. The shots may have woken up Lisa, but she did not have a chance to move very much before she was shot. According to authorities, drugs and alcohol were not involved in the case, and there were no signs of sexual assault. They ruled out robbery as a motive. A video camera the couple had taken with them was missing from the scene, with its carrying case left behind. Potential personal motives that could have led to Brandon and Lisa being targeted by their killer were explored early on in the investigation. Authorities followed up on reports of Brandon having an argument with a middle-aged man outside of the apartment he shared with Lisa the day before they left on their trip. Lisa's uncle Mike was suspicious of one of the young men who located Brandon and Lisa's bodies. The young man had been romantically interested in Lisa. Mike tried to go speak with this young man, but learned while he was driving to his home that he had left town. He moved to Washington and authorities there administered a polygraph, which he passed. Lisa's family felt authorities were too quick to stop investigating this young man following the polygraph, but according to Yavapai County Sheriff's Lieutenant Frank Barbaro, it was just authorities in Washington who considered the man cleared. He says he would not clear someone based solely on the results of a polygraph and will not be clearing anyone of involvement in the case until it is solved. Deborah West, a cold case volunteer with the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, has been working on Lisa and Brandon's case, and she is starting to believe in the possibility that Brandon and Lisa did not know their killer. She bases this opinion largely on a similar crime committed in the same area a short time after Brandon and Lisa were killed. 6 months after their murders, 2 men were shot to death while they were camping just a few minutes away from where Brandon and Lisa had been murdered. The killer stole their pickup truck. He was eventually located. 19. There was a renewed effort in the case. Witnesses were re-interviewed. 19. There was a renewed effort in the case. Witnesses were re-interviewed and testing was performed to look for DNA on several pieces of evidence, including the pants Brandon had been wearing, in case the killer went through his pockets. Also in 2019, authorities released pictures from a disposable camera found near the pickup truck. It had been found amongst some rocks, as though it had been thrown away from the vehicle. It was damaged, but several photographs were developed from it. The final 2 photographs taken with the camera were of Lisa and Brandon sitting in the bed of the truck. Earlier images on the camera were blurry, but included one of a fluorescent light fixture inside of a building. Authorities do not know where it was taken or where Brandon and Lisa may have been before they parked off of Bumblebee Road for the night. A $10,000 reward is being offered for information in the case. 78-year-old John Stewart and his 74-year-old wife, Pansy, were the parents of 3 grown children, a son and 2 daughters, and lived on Foster Drive in Conroe, Texas. They had moved to the property following John's retirement from Mobil Oil. John loved to fish and maintained a garden on his property. He was also in charge of doing the grocery shopping because Pansy no longer drove. The couple attended church every Sunday and always tried to see the best in people and do their best to help them. In August of 1995, John and Pansy fell out of their normal pattern of communication with the rest of their family. John Stewart Jr. thought it was strange when his parents did not answer or return his phone calls for a few days. but was not initially alarmed because the couple regularly visited his sisters in Beaumont, Texas, and he assumed they had just made another trip there. On August 22nd, the couple's nephew, Ron Tullos, concerned that he had not heard from his aunt and uncle, went to their home to check on them. He found both of the cars they owned in the garage. When he went inside the house, kitchen cabinets had been flung open and papers were scattered everywhere. In the living room, he found the body of his uncle. He called the police, who located Pansy's body in another area of the house. Police could not immediately determine the date or cause of the couple's deaths because of the state of their remains. Their autopsies would reveal that they had been shot multiple times and had been dead for about a week. Other evidence, like the most recent newspaper found inside of the house and the sack of mail left in the mailbox, also helped place the date of the murders as August 15, 1995. The Stewarts' normal mail carrier knew that they retrieved their mail from the mailbox every day, but had been on vacation during the week of the murder, and their substitute did not know to raise the alarm when the mail piled up in the box. The home had been ransacked and several items were missing, including a Rolex watch, numerous pieces of Pansy's jewelry, several guns John had collected for display, and John's metal ring bearing the emblem of his former employer, Mobil Oil. According to the couple's son, John Stewart Jr., they were very trusting and routinely left their doors unlocked despite his objections. Therefore, they may have interrupted a burglary committed at random. However, the tape from their answering machine had also been taken, leading to speculation that they had been killed and robbed by someone who knew them. That individual may have taken the tape because his or her voice was recorded somewhere on it. John Sr. and Pansy had expected their son to one day inherit their property so that it will remain in the family. Unfulfilled because of the murder, but could not bring himself to live in the house where his parents had been killed. The house was therefore sold and hauled away to a new location. John built a new house and remained on the family property as his parents would have wanted. The Stewart family hired a private investigator, and the case was featured in the local media, but ultimately went cold. In February of 2021, Montgomery County Sheriff's Office launched their new cold case warm-up initiative in partnership with Clear Channel Outdoor. The initiative will post information about cold cases on 32 digital billboards across 5 counties in Texas. A new case will be featured quarterly. The first case highlighted by the initiative was John and Pansy's. Clear Channel Outdoor estimated that the billboards will generate more than 2 million market impressions within the first month they are displayed. Authorities say they have exhausted their leads in the case and hope that the billboards will generate new ones for them to follow up on and hopefully solve the case. "We need closure. My parents need justice," John Stewart Jr. said at the announcement of the new initiative. "I just would like one person to say something that would help us solve this." 19-year-old Tong Shu was born in the bustling coastal city of Dalian, located in northeastern China, home to over 6 million people. She was the only child of Cheng Shang and Yang Shui, and the three of them shared a close bond. All of them were hardworking, and Tong had shown remarkable potential from a young age. She was both creative and artistic, as well as analytical and academic, playing the piano and dancing while dreaming of becoming either a biologist or a sculptor. However, friends and family often said that Tong could have achieved anything she set her mind to. She earned a place at Dalian Yuming Senior High School, one of the city's most prestigious schools, known for producing top scorers on the college entrance exams, the Gaokao. Students who consistently excel and win special awards may be granted university admission without having to take the Gaokao. While her boyfriend at the time was accepted into a prestigious university in China, sadly, Tong did not share the same fate. She was naturally upset, having worked so hard for it, and this meant her plans were very much up in the air. She now needed to rethink where she would go and what she would study. It would also see an end to her current relationship. She decided to make a big leap and push herself more out of her comfort zone than ever by planning on moving to the United States to attend Iowa State University and study chemical engineering. Her ever-supportive parents gave their life savings the equivalent of $100,000 to support her and the big move. She needed to get a few more things ticked off, including the English foreign language exam. In July 2011 in Beijing, while studying for the exam, Tong met Xinyan Li, who was studying English as well. Li was also set to go to the United States, to the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. The pair hit it off and shared a lot in common, especially as they were both about to make the same huge move to the same country at the same time. Tong's parents met Lee shortly after and said that although he seemed respectful, shy, and quiet, they didn't think the pair were right for the long term. A few others shared the same view, but Tong assured everyone that the pair weren't exclusive or official, and things between them were quite casual. In September 2012, Tong finally joined Iowa State University, maintaining high grades from the start and throwing herself into all aspects of college life. Her friends said when she wasn't studying, she filled her time with dancing, socializing at parties, and teaching Chinese to other students. She made friends easily and was particularly close to the girls she lived with. Tong was the oldest of the 3 roommates, but they all called her little sister because she was the smallest of them, standing at 5'2". Her roommate and best friend Jean said Tong was so smart it drove everyone crazy. She was someone that was always saying she needed to study more, but would consistently come out with straight A's and was always top of the class. She and Lee were still talking long distance, but he soon made quite a surprising decision. He decided he could no longer do the almost 1,000 miles between them and asked to transfer to Iowa State University too. But he didn't have a place to stay, and his classes wouldn't start for a while. So he temporarily moved in with Tong and her roommates. Although they said they initially didn't mind, they did admit living with him was awkward. He didn't socialize. He didn't make an effort with any of them. And he didn't help with any chores, leaving mess everywhere. He didn't like Tong being out and away from him, wanting to know where she was and who she was with all the time. Tong was still adamant that they weren't official and was now growing tired of his possessive behavior. It was now about 2 years into Tong's studies, and everything seemed to be going fairly well. To the relief of her roommates, Lee was now in his own apartment and officially enrolled in his own classes. But Tong was growing more and more distant from him, telling people she wanted to break things off properly and move on. Further issues had arisen when Lee gave police Tong's address as his own when he was pulled over for traffic violations. This created more issues with Tong and her roommates to the point where they didn't even like his name being mentioned and no longer wanted him to visit. On September 3, 2014, Tong spoke to one of her friends who had recently become something more. The pair had been talking for a while and romantic feelings were growing between them. She said the relationship between she and Lee was just causing issues and she wasn't happy and hadn't been for a long time. However, she and Lee had pre-planned a motel break that weekend. She said she was going to go and work everything out when she was back, but it was looking likely that she and Lee would be parting ways. For days later, on the night of September 7th, Tong's father sent her a text message. She had told him she was trying to replace a pair of glasses that she'd lost, and he was reaching out to see if she got new ones. The response he got was short and blunt, saying she had borrowed a pair from a friend. He asked if they could talk via video, having not caught up in a while, but she said she was too busy. It was an odd series of messages, and he was a little sad that she had rushed off the phone. One of her roommates then also got a text, but this one had been sent from Lee's phone at 1:30 a.m. It read, "Hey, I'm still in Iowa City, but I lost my phone, so I'm using Lee's. He has a family emergency and may have to fly back to China today, so I'm going to catch a bus to Minnesota and visit some friends there. I'll be back in a week. Keeping Lee's phone with me, but is running out of battery." Monday, September 8, 2014. As Monday morning came around, people were surprised to see that Tong could not come back home, especially as she had classes. Surprise became concerned, however, when several more days would pass and she was still off the grid. Her friends and roommates decided to all come together to find out who, if anyone, had actually seen or heard from her on her phone over the last week. But no one had, and none of her friends online had heard anything either. Her roommate Jean contacted a few people she knew in Minnesota via social media, and they drew a blank too, saying unless they just hadn't crossed paths in town, she didn't arrive there to see them. On September 18th, with a bad feeling in the pits of their stomachs, her roommates filed a missing persons report. Police initially wondered whether Tom had perhaps gotten homesick and gone back to her parents, saying this wasn't uncommon, especially with international students. But they quickly realized this was not the case for Tong. There was no evidence to suggest that she had left the country, and there was also nothing to show she had taken that bus to Minnesota. Detectives tracked down the other student that she had recently started talking to, but he knew nothing either. Whatever they had between them was very new, and he said he didn't even really know her well enough yet to recognize that this was out of character. Hence the reason he hadn't reported her missing. He was able to give them an alibi which checked out. Students and locals were now sharing missing persons flyers and social media posts as well. Tong's disappearance had really rattled the campus and the community. Using card transactions and going off what her roommates had said, authorities found that Tong and Lee had made the trip to Budget Inn and Suites, checking into room 218 on September 5th, just as they had planned. The hotel owner Ken confirmed this too. He actually knew the couple reasonably well, saying they had been there before and there was nothing unusual about them coming to stay that weekend. On September 6th, Ken said he saw Tong walking around the lobby by herself. The couple were also picked up on CCTV at a gas station buying some bottles of water. Nothing seemed off, and it didn't look like anyone had followed the pair in or out. However, on the morning of Sunday, September 7th, Ken said he had noticed that Tong's car was now gone. And as the room was now empty, it seemed the pair had left in the early morning hours of September 6th. But no one had actually checked them out officially. While the hotel had cameras, annoyingly there was a glitch in the system and any footage of them checking out had not been picked up. Ken said although there was nothing unusual about checking out of the hotel early, normally the couple were late to check out and had to be asked to leave. So knowing this, it did seem a little odd that he hadn't seen them go. Authorities searched Tong's apartment where they found a receipt for a car she had purchased, which gave them her number plate. They sent the make, model, and plate numbers to other police departments in the area, hoping for a hit. They obtained a search warrant for both Lee's apartment and the motel room. Lee's apartment was a total mess. Everything was everywhere and it looked as though he had packed up some of his belongings in a hurry. In the motel room, on some of the walls and the headboard, were some very small dark-colored splatter marks. But without having any evidence to suggest anything had happened, to get the authority to start swabbing and collecting samples was going to take a while. They also had to deal with the issue that other people had stayed in that room after Lee and Tong. They looked into the rest of Lee's phone history. If his phone was still with Tong, this would give them more locations to look at. Between September 5th and September 8th, several calls had been made to someone called Paul. Most had been made from Ames in Iowa, and none had been made from Minnesota. One stood out as it had actually been made all the way from China. They did have the text which indicated Lee had gone to China, but this didn't add up with Tong having his phone. The message that had been sent to Tong's friends, which said that she was still in Iowa City, had actually been sent when the phone was in Chicago. And it was confirmed that Lee had been in Chicago for his changeover flight, which turned out to be delayed. From here, not willing to wait in Chicago, he went to Los Angeles instead and flew to China from there. He clearly still had his phone, not Tong. Paul, the man who had received so many calls, agreed to do an interview with the police. He told them that Lee had reached out to him, asking for help to buy a ticket to China. Paul was confused as he knew that Lee still had classes, but Lee said it was an emergency and didn't elaborate any further. Paul asked him if he needed a return ticket, but Lee said no. Police now knew that something bad had happened to Tong, and Lee was now an official person of interest in her disappearance. September 26, 2014. A call came in to say that Tong's 1997 Toyota Camry had been located. It was parked under a tree near some apartments just outside of Iowa City. One of the apartments nearby belonged to Lee. Residents said that the car had been there for weeks and there was now a pungent smell coming from it. Officers now needed to wait for a warrant to open the car, but the smell coming from inside was one they knew all too well. When they finally were able to open the trunk, they saw a suitcase, and the smell got worse. Inside the suitcase was an already badly decomposing body. There was a dumbbell inside the case as well, and a bloody towel wrapped around the person's head. Although testing needed to be done, they knew it was Tong Shu. It would later be confirmed that she had died of asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. They could still not be sure about when exactly she had been killed, but they believed that she had most likely survived being beaten, only to suffocate after she was forced into the suitcase. Inside the car, they also found some travel documents belonging to Lee, confirming his flight out to China. And Tong's smashed phone was on the driver's seat. Now they knew that Tong was deceased. They went back to the motel, this time with a forensics team. The bloody towel that had been wrapped around her head had come from inside the motel room. Using luminol, they were also able to find traces of blood on some of the furniture. CCTV showed Lee and a TJ Maxx buying the very suitcase which Tong had been found in. He spent a lot of time in the shop comparing sizes and wheeling the cases around. He also purchased 2 dumbbells from a Walmart, one of which was found inside the suitcase. But even despite all of this, there just didn't seem to be any reason for it. They had just gone on a weekend trip away, only for this to happen one day into the trip. But soon, officers would talk to someone who would reveal something which changed a lot. One of the calls Lee had made around the days Tong had last been seen was to someone called Karen, and it had lasted over 3 hours. They tracked down Karen to ask about the nature of it all. It turned out that the conversation Tong had had in confidence with her friend on September 3rd, where she expressed a desire to leave Lee and move on, had actually been overheard by Lee. He said he had called her during her talk and, unbeknownst to her, she had somehow accidentally answered her phone. Lee had stayed on the line for 30 minutes, listening to everything. Karen said Lee was clearly upset and angry, and after this he posted to his social media simply saying, "Fuck my life." Knowing this and what they knew about how Tong was found in the car showed a real premeditation. Someone that had meticulously planned this out and thought the killing through. They believed that the dumbbell in the case was part of a failed plan to throw the case into the river at a later date. And further analysis of Lee's phone showed that between 3 and 4 a.m., he was close to the Skunk River. Police believe this is likely where he was looking to throw the suitcase in, hoping it would sink with the weight inside. When the detectives went to the river, they said it would have been obvious the water was too shallow, which is why he just left the suitcase in the car. They now had the full timeline of events. After overhearing the conversation between Tong and her friend, Lee flew into a rage and set his plan in motion. On September 5th, the couple checked into the budget inn and suites as planned. On September 6th, Lee made his purchases, and this is the same night he booked his one-way ticket to China. It was also the last day that anyone saw Tong alive. On September 7th, after killing Tong, Lee returned to his apartment to gather some things, preparing to leave the country. He drove around debating on throwing the case into the Skunk River, eventually deciding against it and just leaving it in the car instead. He then used his phone pretending to be Tong, texting her friends and Tong's father to bide himself more time. On September 8th, Lee was in Chicago. He bought a ticket to Los Angeles, and a day later he was back on the way to China and on the run. It wouldn't be until March 2015 that an arrest warrant was issued for Lee. But by this point, he was nowhere to be found. China does not have an extradition treaty with the United States, and this filled the police with dread, knowing they might not be able to do anything at all. Detective Gonzalez, who had been leading the investigation, was determined to get justice for Tong and her family. He said, "The one clear message I wanted to send is, if something horrible happens to you like that, no matter what it takes, we're not going to stop. I don't care where you're from, what country you went to, where you fled to. We're just not going to stop." He, along with the district attorney in Iowa, contacted the Chinese authorities and the embassy. To their relief, they agreed to help from overseas and said they would track Lee down and sort out the arrest there. They issued a press release, and it was now national news in China. People on social media were sharing pictures of Lee's face, and the hashtag #FindLee was trending. In May 2015, Lee, who had been hiding out in Wenzhou and knowing there was no way out of it, finally surrendered, and he was taken into custody. Chinese authorities now needed everything from the detectives in Iowa in order to get the case officially transferred over to them. And in June, Lee was now officially under arrest and set to be tried in China for intentional homicide. 1 year later, Lee pleaded guilty, saying he had been irrational and impulsive. His story was that Tong had attacked him, and in self-defense he had killed her. He denied any level of premeditation, claiming he was always going to go back to China and it just all happened at the same time. He maintains that he was very much in love with Tong and was devastated that she didn't feel the same about him. The whole hearing lasted just 6 hours, and Tong's parents were asked not to be present in the courtroom. But this did not stop them. With Tong's mother bursting through the doors at one point in a frantic state, she said her life was meaningless now, and she was feeling nothing but bitterness. Lee's parents met with Tong's parents, where they begged for forgiveness on behalf of their son and agreed to pay 2 million yuan, the equivalent of about $300,000 in compensation. The verdicts for intentional homicide ranged anywhere from 10 years in prison to the death penalty, and Tong's parents said they were hoping for the latter when it came to it. Her father said, "A Chinese saying goes, a murderer should pay for his crime with his life." In June 2016, Lee was handed a life sentence, which could later be reduced to 13 years under Chinese law. But as always, whether this would actually happen or not remains to be seen. The news had devastated her parents so much that her father's health took a serious turn, and he was told he was unable to travel to the United States to bring his daughter's ashes home. Detectives back in Iowa said that the case set a precedent for how the United States and China can cooperate on international crime investigations. The district attorney added, "We have many more students from China than we have had in the past here in the Midwest, especially in Iowa City, and so there's a real interest in making sure that there's a sense of safety and that people feel that they can come to the United States as students and be safe." Another reason that Tong's case had become so massive so quickly. 19-year-old Tong Shu was determined and hardworking. She had made the brave move to the United States to push herself further, to challenge herself in all aspects of her life, and make her family proud. She was succeeding on so many levels and undoubtedly would have gone on to many more successes. Her friends remember her as a truly lovely person, someone that can make you laugh, entertain you, and cry along with you when you needed someone. To this day, Tom's roommate Jean carries a prayer book with her that Tom gave her. She bookmarked the page which marked the date she last saw her. Part of it reads as follows: "Keep me focused on God, on the path before me, even when it seems stacked with insurmountable obstacles. Remind me that I do not walk alone, but with all those whose aim is to walk with you." She says she takes comfort in this and sees it as her sign that her dear friend is always with her. Nova Welsh was born in Jamaica in 1957 and moved to the United Kingdom with her family at the age of 10. Always smiling and full of laughter, she was loved by everyone in her community. At just 16, she left home to live with her boyfriend, Osmond. The couple would eventually have 2 sons together. However, their relationship was fraught with arguments, some of which turned physical. By the summer of 1981, the volatile and abusive relationship was falling apart. Nova confided in her sister, Valerie, that Osmond had hit her and threatened to kill her if she tried to leave. Neighbors reported frequent arguments between the couple, with their raised voices often audible in nearby apartments. The relationship finally ended after a particularly violent incident in June. Nova's stepsister, Sonia, heard screaming from the couple's kitchen in their apartment on Laythorne Avenue, Ladywood, Birmingham. When Sonia rushed into the kitchen, she saw Osmond with a dish towel wrapped around his hands. Although Sonia wanted to call the police, Osmond ordered her not to. The police did respond to the scene, and Nova told them that she and Osmond had been arguing. She said she had tried unsuccessfully to get him to leave when the situation escalated. Nova chose not to file a report about the incident, and Osmond left the home. He moved out a short time later, going to live in Regent Road, Handsworth. While she did not discuss the details of the incident with the authorities, Nova did share them with her friends. She told several of them that Osmond had tried to strangle her and showed them the marks on her neck that the attack had left. Osmond was not happy about the end of his relationship with Nova and sent her letters threatening to kill her if she did not get back together with him, telling her that if he could not have her, then no one else could either. According to a friend who had seen one of these letters, Osmond had written Nova that if you don't have me back, then you know what I will have to do. On July 25, 1981, Nova dropped off her 2 sons, ages 26, with Osmond. That evening, she went out to a party with a man she had recently begun seeing and a group of friends. Throughout the following morning-afternoon, neighbors could hear Nova crying and arguing with someone. The last sighting of her was around 6 o'clock that evening when a neighbor reported seeing her, looking upset. Nova never returned to pick up her sons and failed to show up to her job as a cleaner on Monday morning, July 27th. Nova's mother and some other family members had just moved to Miami and were hoping that now that Nova's relationship with Osmond was over, she would decide to join them in America with her 2 sons. 3 days after they arrived in Florida, they attempted to call Nova to let her know that they had safely arrived. She did not answer the phone, and they could not reach her despite numerous further phone calls. One of Nova's closest friends was Lorna Edmonds. Lorna was also one of Nova's neighbors and sometimes helped her by watching her 2 children. Lorna had not seen Nova since July 22nd, when Nova had told her that she would not need her help to watch the boys that night because they would be going to see their father instead. Lorna became concerned about Nova when her own phone calls to her went unanswered. She was also worried because Nova's laundry remained up on the line outside. She reported Nova missing to police on August 9th. A massive effort was launched to try to locate the missing woman. Posters were put up around Birmingham. Authorities went door to door, visiting over 500 residences by the end of the month, and the case was featured in the local media. One article in the Evening Mail featured photos of and quotes from Nova's 2 young sons asking for their mother to come home. Osmond Bell was an obvious suspect in Nova's disappearance to her loved ones, given his history of violence towards her in the past. Furthermore, he had never reported Nova missing, even though she had never returned for her sons, and was by all accounts a loving mother who doted on her children. He told police he had assumed Nova had run off with her new boyfriend or left for America to see her family in Florida. On August 12th, an anonymous letter was delivered to Lorna Edmonds that appeared to divert suspicion away from Osmond. The unsigned letter appeared to be written from the perspective of a woman. In it, the writer claimed her boyfriend had seen another man grab and hit Nova through her kitchen window on Sunday, July 26th. The letter writer further stated that her boyfriend had identified the man he had seen as the man Nova had been dating. He was able to make this identification because he had been at the same party Nova and her new boyfriend had attended on July 25th and had seen them there together. At an inquest into the case in December of 1982, it was revealed that police theorized that the letter was written either by Nova's killer or at the killer's behest to throw suspicion onto Nova's new boyfriend. On August 18th, residents of the tower block where Nova lived began complaining about a foul odor coming from a utility cupboard under the stairs in the basement. When the cupboard was opened, the body of 24-year-old Nova was found inside of it. She was wearing her night clothes and was covered with a blanket and some papers. Authorities believed that she had been killed in her apartment. Her body was then wrapped in the blanket and taken down to the cupboard 2 flights below. The investigation into Nova's murder was initially delayed by several days due to problems with the handling of her initial post-mortem examination. Her second post-mortem examination would show that she had been killed as a result of pressure to the neck. Authorities believed, based on the condition of Nova's body and witness reports, that she had most likely been killed in the early morning hours of July 27th, meaning she had been dead the entire time she had been missing and that her body had remained hidden for 3 weeks. Osmond Bell was taken into custody so that he could be questioned for 4 days, but he was ultimately released due to a lack of evidence. It would be more than 3 decades before Nova's case would be solved using technology that had not been available to investigators in 1981. In 2014, as part of a cold case inquiry, several items of evidence in the case were re-examined in hopes of finding DNA on them. DNA was found on 2 important pieces of evidence: on the seal of the envelope the anonymous letter sent to Lorna Edmonds had mailed in, on the strip of adhesive where the sender had presumably licked the envelope to seal it, and in a piece of chewing gum used to secure the lock on the door to the cupboard where Nova's body had been found. The DNA profile extracted from the gum was complete, but the profile from the envelope was incomplete, providing only 17 points of comparison instead of the normally accepted 20. Both the incomplete sample from the envelope and the complete sample from the chewing gum were a match to Osmond Bell's DNA. The then 59-year-old was arrested and charged with Noah's murder in August of 2016. At his trial in February of 2017, Osmond Bell told the court that he had been abused by police officers during his interrogation following the discovery of Noah's body, and that they had hit him over the head and kicked his chair out from under him. He said his DNA was on the envelope because he had been left alone in the interrogation room with the letter and the envelope during his questioning. He said he picked up the letter to read it because he assumed he was being watched and the police would not come back into the room until they saw him read the letter. He explained the presence of his DNA on the chewing gum found in the lock by claiming he, his brother, and his business partner had previously been in the cupboard trying to access a pipe. As a part of the washing machine repair business, they ran out of a nearby garage. They had forced the door open and he had used his gum to repair the lock to keep the door closed at this time, not at the time of Nova's murder. The jury deliberated for 6 days at the end of the 6-week-long trial before reaching a verdict in the case. They acquitted Osmond Bell on the murder charge but found him guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 12 years but would only be incarcerated for sex, as he would be allowed to serve half of his sentence out on license. When sentencing Bell, Judge Patrick Thomas told him he saw no evidence that he had premeditated killing Nova and that he believed the crime had occurred following an argument, most likely the result of Bell's jealousy over Nova taking advantage of her newfound freedom by socializing. Then said the judge, having killed her, you concealed her body, doing nothing to assuage the pain and grief of your own children. Nova's mother, Lorna Welsh, released a statement through the police following the conviction. Finally, after 36 long years, Nova can rest in peace, it read. The family can now have closure knowing the person who took Nova's life has been brought to justice. I would sincerely like to thank everyone involved in bringing this case to court. 47-year-old Lindsay Birbeck was a devoted mother of 2, living in Huncote, a village on the outskirts of Accrington, Lancashire, in the United Kingdom. In her early 20s, while out one night, she met the man she would later marry, Tim Birbeck. Tim said that Lindsay was stunning and caught his eye immediately. After 3 years of dating, they tied the knot. Less than 2 years later, they welcomed their first child, a son named Stephen, and 2 years after that, their daughter, Sarah, followed. Lindsay worked as a teaching assistant at a local primary school, where her passion for helping others was evident in her work with children with additional learning needs. She loved children and would do anything for her students, even using her artistic skills to create sets and props for school plays. Lindsay was also very athletic, and long country walks were a regular part of her life. After 20 years of marriage, Lindsay and Tim began to grow apart. Realizing they had different goals and dreams, they decided to separate and divorce. However, their split was amicable, and they continued to remain on good terms, always willing to help each other when needed. Lindsay moved into a house on Burnley Road in Accrington and began a new relationship. Tim would also start seeing someone else too. August 12, 2019, Lindsay and her daughter Sarah went out for a day of shopping at the mall in Blackburn. Sarah had just finished her GCSEs and wanted to buy some new things for her college course. They did some shopping before going to an Asda supermarket. And after a while, the pair said their goodbyes, and Lindsay dropped her daughter off at around 3 p.m. In the evening, she was due to have food with Sarah and Sarah's boyfriend at 6. Lindsay said she would see them then and told Sarah she loved her. As the couple traveled over to Lindsay's, they were confused to find that she wasn't there, and the door was locked. Sarah hadn't taken her key as she assumed her mother would be there to let her in. They knocked, but there was no response. They sat and waited, and as time ticks by with still no sign of her, they became increasingly concerned. Sarah tried to get in touch with her mother with calls and text messages, but her phone appeared to be off. The messages didn't deliver, and there was no reply. She called her father and asked him to pick them up, explaining that Lindsay's car was still parked outside and her phone had been turned off. They ran through the various possibilities. Had she run into friends and become sidetracked? Had she lost track of time? But this was so unlike Lindsay, and Sarah said she would never just not turn up. Sarah sent a message to Lindsay's best friend, Sharon, asking if she knew where she was. Sharon said that she hadn't heard from her either, and her messages also didn't deliver to Lindsay's phone. She then went back to her father's house and they went back with a set of keys to let themselves inside. Nothing seemed out of place. After calling out into the house, there was no response, just silence. They knew they needed to contact the police, so just after midnight, Tim called them. He told the operator that this was not like her and she had never done anything like this before. Police officer was dispatched. When it became clear that she definitely wasn't there, a major missing persons investigation was launched. As this was so out of character, Lindsay was classified as a high-risk missing person. Tim was questioned about his movements that day, but he was quickly accounted for and had a watertight alibi. They needed to piece together her last known movements. Lindsay had been captured on CCTV heading down Burnley Road. She had taken her phone and her keys with her. As she loved to stay active, she had decided to go for a walk in a local area called the Coppice, a place that she would often go to made up of woodlands and footpaths. The authorities were concerned that maybe she had fallen and injured herself, leaving her unable to get help. Lancashire police utilized a helicopter and drone and worked alongside the fire and rescue service and the mountain rescue service too to try and find her. Hundreds of people from the local community came out to help. Missing persons posters were put up, and a Facebook group garnered more than 10,000 members. People from all walks of life had joined in the search, from seasoned walkers to parents with pushchairs. Everybody was desperate to find her. A dog walker would soon make a discovery. A red garment was found hanging on a fence. Lindsay's jacket had a red lining to it. As the search efforts continued, there was still no sign of Lindsay Birbeck. And as the days continued to pass, hope was quickly fading that they would find her alive. In a press conference 4 days after her disappearance, Detective Chief Inspector Alan Davies said that significant searches had been carried out and asked for anyone who had been in the Coppice at around 4:30 p.m. on the day Lindsay had last been seen to come forward. That evening, 100 responded to a call on social media to take part in a search for Lindsay, with her friends saying the support from the community had moved them to tears. One of the co-organizers said, "The community spirit is just amazing, and we will not stop until she is found." The searches were split into teams of 20 with a map of the area put up at the base. Each group would mark off what had been searched, and they would look through every inch of their assigned areas. Detective Inspector Tim McDermott said the police were overwhelmed by the support and dedication shown by members of the public. It had now been a week since Lindsay had gone missing. Teams were deployed to search the rivers, and more people continued to come out and join the hunt. August 24, 2019. The police received a call. A man had been walking his dog in Accrington Cemetery when it went into a wooded area. He had called for his dog to come back to him, but the dog didn't respond. It was fixated by something on the ground. It was sniffing. The dog walker said, "I walked further forward and stood on something soft and squishy. I immediately jumped back and grabbed my dog by the collar. I then smelt a horrible smell. It smelt rotten and there were flies around it. I could see plastic and what looked like a leg." 12 days after she had been reported missing, the search for Lindsay Birbeck came to an end. There in Accrington Cemetery, her body was found. Lindsay's naked body had been wrapped in plastic and put into a makeshift grave, with dirt from around the cemetery put on top of her in an attempt to conceal it. When the knock came at the door late that night, Sarah said she knew instantly it was not the good news they were hoping for. Following the discovery, Detective Superintendent Andy Cribben of Lancashire Police gave a statement. As news of the discovery began to spread, flowers were left in tribute to Lindsay, as those who had spent so much time looking for her were now faced with the heartbreaking truth. One card said that even though they didn't know Lindsay, she had touched their heart. A vigil was also held in nearby Peel Park, where a minute's silence took place and a choir sang Amazing Grace. The local church was packed out as people headed there to light candles for her. Flowers were also laid outside her school. Lindsay's ex-husband Tim said he was broken by the news and devastated watching his children lose their mother in such horrendous circumstances. Home Office pathologist Dr. Naomi Carter carried out the post-mortem. Lindsay had died from severe neck injuries. Dr. Carter said in her 25-year career, she had never seen such extensive crushing damage to an entire larynx, saying it had the same severity as one would expect to see in an industrial accident. Due to the state of decomposition, she had to be identified using dental records. And also as a result of the decomposition process, no evidence of sexual violence or assault could be found. There had also been an attempt to saw off one of her legs. The police were now in a race against time to catch her killer, and the local community was in fear that someone else would soon fall victim. The following day, August 25th, A crime scene investigation team descended on the cemetery to conduct their inquiries. They found a pair of gloves and a saw close to the grave, and tests on them came back positive for blood. Lindsay's shoes were found in a skip, wrapped in a blue plastic bag with the soles cut off. They were able to get a DNA profile, and it belonged to a male. The gloves also had a male DNA profile on the inside, and Lindsay's DNA was on the outside. The rest of her clothes have never been recovered. The police needed to establish exactly how her body had come to be in the cemetery. Between her body and the plastic she had been wrapped in were bits of grass and a leaf. The police had a botanist come in to examine the foliage. They were able to determine that the grass in between her body and the plastic had not come from inside the cemetery, meaning she had been murdered elsewhere. The exact location of her murder has not been established, but it's believed it most likely happened in the coppice just minutes after she left her home. One object would soon blow the case wide open. In the cemetery was a blue wheelie bin. Several people had seen the blue wheelie bin during the searches, with one person even reporting it to the police. But at that time, she was still considered a missing person, and there was no evidence to suggest that she had come to any harm. So the police said there was no evidence to link it to her disappearance, and it was left where it was, with nobody realizing its significance. Then, an officer reviewing the CCTV footage came across something that immediately stood out. A young male wearing a gray tracksuit was filmed pulling a blue wheelie bin along Burnley Road at 2:30 p.m. before he turned onto Whitewall Road and headed into the cemetery. It had been filmed on August 17th, 5 days after Lindsay had last been seen. The police were cautious about releasing the footage initially. They knew they needed to find this person and quickly, but if he wasn't involved, releasing the footage could put him at risk. They decided to spend the next 24 hours trying to find him through the police databases throughout the country. But they came back with nothing. As they were trying to find him, a witness came forward. A woman had been on the coppice at the same time as Lindsay. She had a very worrying story to tell. I looked to my left and saw a lone male figure on a path that runs parallel to the path that I am on. There was a lot of foliage. I didn't have a clear view of him at that point. I decided whatever route he went, I would take another route. From the first time I saw him, I was wary of him. He looked out of place in the woods. He was in front of me. He was walking very slowly. I didn't want to be in front of him. I wanted to be able to see him at all times. I slowed down so I could be behind him. As she grew even more concerned, she picked up her pace and began to look around for something heavy that she could use to defend herself if needed. She told the police in her statement, "While I can't say what his original pace was at that point, what I can say for sure is that as I turned my head to glance at him, he pulled up short, almost startled when I turned to look. I didn't look back again. I just didn't. I never saw him again." She was filmed coming out of the coppice. The path that she had taken would be the same one Lindsay would take. She couldn't do a formal identification, but her description matched the person from the CCTV footage. On August 27th, the police decided to release the CCTV footage and issued an appeal for anyone who recognized him to come forward. The footage quickly made the national news. Then, Lindsay and Tim's son, Stephen, received a phone call from one of his friends. His friend said he recognized the male and they went to the same gym. Soon, the police would get the break they had been hoping for. After seeing the appeal for information, a mother and father brought their son to Greenbank Police Station the same day the footage was released to the public. Their son was just 16 years old. Rocky Marciano Price was subsequently taken into custody. He was the same person that Stephen's friend had mentioned. A ban on reporting his name and any details about him was initially put in place to protect his identity, but this would later be lifted. When his home was searched, the same plastic that had been used to wrap Lindsay's body was found, and tracksuits from the CCTV footage were found too. His DNA was a match to the items in the cemetery containing the male DNA profile. But who exactly was this 16-year-old suspected murderer? Rocky Marciano Price lived on Wynn Hill Road with his parents and 5 siblings. He had an IQ of 65 and learning difficulties including autism and ADHD. He was a student at a school for those who were unable to remain in the mainstream school system, where his teachers described him as very quiet, pretty much nonverbal most of the time. He avoided conversation unless it was something he wanted to talk about, like the chickens on his family farm that he helped to care for. He often went to the gym and spent his free time watching films and playing video games. He was assessed in 2015, and a psychologist concluded that he had a limited understanding of his own emotions and his own emotional well-being and appeared to have little insight into the connection between events and emotions. A report completed the following year described him as having no stranger awareness and needing supervision outside. The police were able to trace his movements that day. At around 2:30 p.m. on the day of Lindsay's death, he had headed into the coppice, and Lindsay did the same at around 4 o'clock. Within a couple of hours, Price had left the coppice and walked down Burnley Road. It appeared that his tracksuit top was partially unzipped, and his tracksuit bottom's cord was untied. He also appeared to have wet knees. Price had gone back to the body twice on August 12th. At 6:55 p.m., CCTV captured him carrying a black rucksack. He then left the coppice with the rucksack before returning with the wheelie bin. A witness saw him at 8:28 p.m. pulling a bin that sounded empty. He would then return to the grave a further 2 times. Throughout his 11 interviews over 3 days, his answer to everything was no comment. But later, he had a prepared statement. It read in part as follows: "I am not involved in Lindsay Birbeck's murder. However, I was approached by a white male who speaks English, who offered me a large sum of money to move the body. I have not met this man before. I have not met him since, nor have I had any contact with him. He has not paid me any money. He told me that he would leave the money for me near where the body had been at first once everything was clear. I cannot describe the man other than to say he was white, male, spoke English. I could not see his face well as he was covering it with his hood. I am not sure of his height, build, or age." Detectives scoured the CCTV footage to try and find if there was any evidence of this white male being in the coppice, but they could find none. On the August 31st, Price was charged with murder. Her devastated family said they were emotionally exhausted and completely and utterly numb. On Monday, September 2nd, Price appeared at Blackburn Magistrates Court before the case was sent to be heard at Preston Crown Court the next day. He pleaded guilty to moving and hiding her body, but he entered a plea of not guilty to the charge of murder. On September 20th, Lindsay Birbeck's funeral was held at St. Margaret's Church with more than 200 in attendance. An obituary read, "Lindsay was the most amazing mom. She doted on her children and always gave her all to ensure that their life was fun and filled with laughter." The road was closed off as her coffin was taken into the church, and the community came out in their droves to say goodbye and to show support for her family and loved ones. Rocky Price's trial was set for the February 25, 2020, with Mrs. Justice Yip presiding. As the trial got underway, several problems caused difficulties. The trial didn't take place for 2 days in the second week, as the judge had other commitments that she had to attend to. Problems with the power and the heating forced the court to end early on Wednesday, and then they were sent home at lunchtime on Thursday when the prosecution rested their case. But just a few days later, there would be a shocking turn of events that nobody had been prepared for. The defense made an application to discharge the jury and have a retrial. This was before they had made their case. Meetings were held between the defense, the judge, and the prosecution. On March 9th, the court reconvened without the jury. The judge placed strict reporting restrictions on the matter, but the problems at hand would later come to light. That day, the court was told that 2 men, ages 22 and 23, and a 22-year-old woman had been arrested for a separate offense of the false imprisonment of a young man. This was not related to Lindsay's case, and the parties involved were not connected to Rocky Price or the wider inquiry. A video found on the phone of one of those who had been detained purported to show a man discussing aspects of the Birbeck case and saying he had been involved in the murder and the disposal of the body. David McLaughlin QC for the prosecution said that the video was neither consistent with the facts of the case, nor with the defense put forward by the defendant, but added it was clearly something that had to be fully investigated to ensure the defendant could have a fair trial. Lancashire Constabulary examined the footage over the following 5 days, and 25 officers were part of the inquiry. Following this, they were satisfied that this apparent confession was false. David McLaughlin agreed that the extensive nature of the inquiries required proper consideration by the defense, and this could not be done in a realistic timescale for the first trial to continue. He added that in his 30-year career as a lawyer, he had only ever dealt with a situation like this once and referred to the matter as almost uncharted territory. On March 10th, the jury was officially discharged and the trial against him collapsed. Price was remanded in custody and a new trial date was set for June 15th. When COVID hit and lockdown orders were issued, the trial was pushed back again, this time to the August 3rd. Finally, the new trial commenced. His story that he had been offered money by an anonymous man to move the body was dismissed by the prosecution as implausible fiction. The woman who had given the statement to the police saying that she had been followed by a male on the coppice was not able to formally identify Price in court. But the DNA could link him to Lindsay through various bits of evidence. His DNA was on her trainers and her DNA was on the outside of the gloves, and his DNA was on the inside of them. Both of them could be linked to the wheelie bin. The state of decomposition suggested that she had been stored upside down in the wheelie bin before being taken to the cemetery. He sat slouched in the dock with his hands in his pockets, with Sarah saying he showed no respect for anybody in the court. As the trial continued, the horrifying details were laid bare. The brutal nature of her death and the injuries that she had sustained shocked the court, and coverage of the trial made national news. After the defense and prosecution had rested their cases, it was now time for the jury to deliberate. The August 12, 2020, 1 year to the day since Lindsay had been murdered. After just 3 hours of deliberations, the jury had reached their verdict. DSI Cribben described the atmosphere in court. It's an atmosphere like none I've ever experienced before at any murder trial. Rocky Marciano Price was unanimously found guilty of murder. Mrs. Justice Yip said the killing had been significantly premeditated, saying, "He lay in wait on the coppice near to Lindsay's home. The only conclusion I can draw is he was looking for a woman to kill. I don't know what was on his mind at the time. The attack was swift and brutal. The murder of a stranger in broad daylight with no rational explanation is horrifying to all members of society. The random nature of the killing shows the defendant presents a very real risk to members of the public. I have no doubt he knew what he was doing and knew it was terribly wrong. The stalking of another woman also demonstrates this did not arise out of a sudden loss of control or heat of the moment. He persisted with his plan to target a lone woman. It shows he had the capacity to plan and reason. When deciding on her sentence, she decided she would take into account his lack of previous criminal convictions, what was referred to as his immaturity, and that he was likely to have challenges while in prison. Price was not in court for the sentencing and appeared via a video link. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. Due to his age, the minimum term was 12 years, but as there was an element of premeditation, he received 16. He showed no reaction as his sentence was handed down. Following his sentence, members of his family wore shirts saying, "Wrongly convicted. Free this boy." The back of the shirt said, "Murderer still at large." His father said, "Our son is innocent. He has not got the mental capacity to hurt anyone. We are not going to stop fighting if it takes us all our lives to find this other man." In spite of the evidence, there are those that do not believe he is responsible. A group of around 30 marched in protest against his conviction, again arguing that the guilty verdict was wrong. A petition was created on change.org arguing that he had been wrongfully convicted, and rumors were even spread that Tim was responsible. Tim said, "The police kept saying to me, just ignore them, Tim, and they'll go away. But they do chip away at you. It does hurt you. We've been through absolute hell regarding this. Then you've got to deal with these people who are pointing fingers. It's despicable. I just want people to understand there's still a family picking up the pieces and trying to rebuild." After Price was sentenced, DSI Cribben gave a statement outside court. Lindsay's devastated family said, "Our lives have been utterly destroyed by the evil, cowardly behavior of the defendant and the horrific manner in which she was murdered. It has left a huge void in our lives that will never be filled. This callous act has destroyed our lives forever. Our family needs time to reflect and grieve for Lindsay and to try and rebuild our shattered lives." Lindsay Birbeck was a woman who touched the lives of many, from the students she worked with to the friends that she made. She devoted her life to helping young people who needed extra support, and would always put others before herself. The way in which the community rallied together to try and find her was inspiring. But for those left in the wake of such an appalling crime, life will never be the same. Her legacy will continue to live on through the lives of her children and loved ones who will ensure that she will never ever be forgotten. 37-year-old Erica Lloyd was a devoted mother to her 12-year-old son, living in Walnut Creek, California. The year 2020 proved challenging for Erica as she struggled with the impact of the pandemic. As a hairstylist, she was unable to work for months due to salon closures, and she faced additional stress while helping her son with distance learning. In search of some relief, Erica decided to take a solo camping trip to Joshua Tree National Park, 7 hours away from home, in June, hoping the time alone in nature would help her cope with the pressures she was facing. She left for her trip on Sunday, June 14th, and it was confirmed that she had arrived at the park. However, on June 16th, Erica suddenly stopped communicating with her family. That same day, California Highway Patrol found Erica's vehicle near the intersection of Shelton Road and Highway 62 near 29 Palms. It appeared Erica had last been driving back to the nearby national park. As it was facing south, the car had been vandalized with its radio and front and back windshields found smashed in. In addition to the vandalism, there were also indications that the disabled vehicle had been in an accident. Its airbag had deployed, and it had damage to its undercarriage. The owners of the company that towed away the car believed it had hit a large object, potentially the berm of the road, due to the fact that car's radiator in the AC condenser had been smashed backwards. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department did not believe that there were any signs of foul play at the scene where the car was found. A massive air and ground search was launched for Erica, with volunteers, park rangers, and members of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department participating in the effort. Altering vehicles and search dogs were also brought in. Erica's camping equipment was located at a campsite at the Jimbo Rocks campground. Caves and mines in the area were searched for any sign of Erica. Erica's parents made multiple trips to California from their home in Maryland to help with the search and to put up flyers. A witness did report a sighting of a woman matching Erica's description, walking along Highway 62 with another person a week after Erica went missing. But this woman has not conclusively proven to be Erica. Erica's family feared that she may have sustained a head injury when her car was in the accident and wandered off either disoriented or suffering from memory loss. Despite ongoing efforts, Erica remained missing for months. On January 31, 2021, hikers discovered what they believed to be human skeletal remains. They called in their discovery, and deputies from the Morongo Basin Sheriff Station were dispatched to the scene. They confirmed that the remains were human. Detectives from the Specialized Investigations Division removed the remains from the scene, and a forensic odontologist was able to use dental records to identify the remains as belonging to Erica Lloyd. The cause and manner of her death have not been determined. The Sheriff Department's investigation is ongoing. Erica's remains were found in a desert field 100 block of Danby Road in Wonder Valley. If Erica had stayed on roads as she walked away from where her car had been found, she would have walked 8 miles to reach the location where her remains were ultimately located. If she had instead headed out into the desert, she would have covered 6 miles before reaching that location. Erica's brother Colin posted on the Facebook page that had been dedicated to the search for Erica, announcing the discovery of her remains and thanking the numerous people and organizations who had helped look for her. Right now is the time for grieving, and I encourage everyone to pause and reflect on the beautiful soul we've lost. Our Erica, he further wrote in the post. Remember her, cherish her memory, celebrate moments past, and laugh. She would always make you laugh. Erica adored everyone. She left a bright smile on everyone's heart. She would remind you of who you truly were and how important and loved you were. She warmed your soul. Let us hold her spirit dearly and allow it to work through us to serve others. What she would want us to do. Between 1991-26, a string of violent rapes was committed across 6 counties in Northern California. Authorities believed, based on details consistent across all the attacks, that all of them were committed by the same man who came to known as the NorCal rapist. He would break into the homes of young women, usually of Asian descent, and spend hours assaulting them. He often used either a knife or a gun, or promises that he had such a weapon to subdue them, and would then bind them with handcuffs, rope, or zip ties and put tape over their eyes. Several of his victims managed to injure him as they fought to get away. One victim briefly broke free of her restraints and stabbed him in the arm with a pair of scissors. He took her bedding with him in an effort to not leave evidence behind, but he failed to take a pillowcase which had his blood on it. Another victim grabbed the knife he had with him, cutting her hand in the process, but breaking off its tip, which she used to stab him just above his right eye. The rapist would sometimes kidnap his victims, taking them to ATMs and forcing them to withdraw cash. He would also ransack his victims' homes looking for valuables, sometimes taking their bank cards to withdraw cash from ATMs himself. He used various threats to try to prevent his victims from going to the police, leaving a note reading, "Don't call the cops," with an arrow pointing to the victim's mother's address and phone number in her address book, and telling another victim the location where she worked, and then threatening that he would show co-workers photographs he had taken of her during her assault. Authorities had DNA from all but one of the crime scenes, which confirmed that those victims had been attacked by the same man. Some of the DNA evidence came not from the sexual assault kits, but from the assailant's blood left behind when the victim fought back. However, the DNA profile was not in any criminal database. In 2018, therefore, authorities used genetic genealogy to try to use the DNA to identify their suspect. The DNA profile was uploaded into GeneMatch, a genealogy database, and familial matches were identified. By constructing family trees of the individuals who shared DNA with the rapist, authorities were eventually able to identify a suspect based on the amount of DNA he shared with the individuals identified through GeneMatch. They collected a drinking straw that suspect threw away and compared the DNA found on it to the profile found at the crime scenes. It was a match. On September 20th, 2018, 58-year-old Roy Charles Waller of Benicia, California was arrested as he came into work at UC Berkeley, where he had worked since 1992, employed as safety specialist. He was married and a father. At the time of his arrest, Waller was initially only charged with 12 counts of forced sexual assault in connection to the final attack attributed to the NorCal rapist. By the time his trial began in October of 2020, however, he was charged with a total of 46 felonies. While he went to trial for raping 9 women, DNA also linked him to a further 8 cases throughout Northern California. All 9 of the women Waller was accused of raping and attacking testified at his trial, as did numerous members of law enforcement and sexual assault forensic nurse examiners who had worked on the case. Many of them were now retired, and several of them had traveled from out of state to testify. In addition to the DNA, prosecutors also presented further evidence discovered after Waller's arrest. In a storage unit he rented, they found a ski mask, zip ties, 2 tasers, condoms, duct tape, and handcuffs. There was also a duffel bag containing more than 20 pairs of women's underwear, including 1 pair that matched a pair that had been taken from home of a victim during a NorCal rapist attack. Waller testified on his own behalf and claimed that he had some of the items in the storage unit because he was a collector of odd things, and others because of a relationship he previously had with a particularly wild girlfriend. Waller had also posted several Craigslist ads over the years looking for young, female Asian roommates. On the stand, he claimed he had done so as favors for the daughters of various former girlfriends, although he claimed to not remember any of their names. While he said he had met those women through profiles they had posted on dating sites, he claimed that they had needed his help posting the housing ads online. When questioned as to why he had compiled a database on his computer listing the physical descriptions of various women, the vehicles they drove, their addresses, and notations about whether or not they lived in ground floor apartments, Waller said he had simply kept a list of people he hoped to introduce himself to. The prosecution maintained that Waller had a faint scar above his right eye, where one victim had stabbed her attacker, but Waller's defense maintained that there was no such scar. Waller rolled up his sleeve during his testimony to show that he had only a round scar from a pain-falling accident on his arm and no signs that he had been stabbed there with scissors by one of the victims. When asked to explain how his DNA ended up at almost all of the crime scenes, Waller said he had never been to any of them and that he was not a DNA expert. Other testimony given during the trial detailed how Waller had ties to other evidence in the case and how he had come to talk to authorities about the case more than a decade before his arrest. Following the last attack attributed to the NorCal rapist, in which he assaulted and raped 2 female roommates for hours in their North Natomas apartment in 2006, police were able to locate security camera footage in the neighborhood, which showed a white Toyota 4Runner they believed may have been involved in the attack. They then visited numerous Toyota dealerships, and salespeople helped them narrow down the vehicle in the footage as being a higher-end model made between 1999 and 2002. Then police searched vehicle registrations in Northern California to identify owners of white 4Runners from those model years. Members of various departments in the area began the ambitious task of speaking with thousands of people who owned such vehicles. They conducted thousands of interviews, distributed thousands of questionnaires, and took voluntary DNA samples from over 100 men. On February 11, 2007, Sacramento Police Detective Jimmy Vigan and his partner went to the home of a nurse in Fairfield to speak with her about her 4Runner. Her boyfriend at the time, who lived with her part-time, was also at the home. He was Roy Charles Waller. They did not ask for a DNA cheek swab from him, however. One of the two in the final attack had briefly caught a glimpse of the perpetrator when her blindfold slipped and helped develop a composite sketch. Vigan and his partner did not think Waller resembled the sketch and believed him to be too old and too heavy to be the man in it. They left a questionnaire for the nurse to fill out after their conversation and left. Following his testimony about this interaction, Detective Egan told the Sacrament of Bee that he wishes he had asked for a DNA swab from Waller at that time. He hoped, however, that his meeting with Waller was not without benefit, even though it did not lead to an arrest at the time. Since the North Natomas attack was the last attributed to the NorCal rapist, he believed this interaction with authorities may have scared Waller into ceasing his crime spree. The nurse also testified at the trial. She had traveled to the Philippines for a funeral, although it is unclear if she was out of the country at the exact time of the 2006 dual attack, freeing Waller to use her vehicle, which she had access to without her knowledge. On November 18, 2020, the jury returned their verdict after just 2.5 hours of deliberation. They found Waller guilty of all of the 46 charges against him, which included charges of kidnapping, forcible rape, oral population, sodomy, and foreign penetration. "It didn't matter what I did," Waller's defense attorney, Joe Farina, said following the announcement of the verdict. "It was a DNA case. We could not overcome the fact that his DNA was at nearly all the crime scenes." He also said that his client had not shared his concerns about how seriously the jury would take the DNA evidence, saying Waller never seemed to understand it was a DNA case. He thought he was going to be acquitted. He denied having anything to do with it. Waller's sentencing hearing was held on December 18, 2020. 5 of his victims addressed the court during it. One of the roommates from the double attack in 2006 told the court that she had showered without feeling afraid for the first time following her assault on the day of Waller's arrest in 2018 because she no longer had to worry about him breaking into her home again. She also pointed out that Waller had not expressed any remorse or apologized to any of his victims. She revealed that his daughter, on the other hand, had reached out to her and apologized for her father's actions. Nicole Ernest Pate, believed to be Waller's first victim, told the court he should experience the barbaric sense of time around him, knowing that this is his fate will set me free for good. Following the statements from the victims, the judge imposed 2 terms, one of 459 years and one of 438 years to life. The sentences are to run consecutively, giving Waller a total sentence of 897 years to life. The judge ruled that Waller would not be eligible for parole both because he considered him to be a serious danger to society and because he had presented blatantly false testimony at trial. Waller maintains his innocence and plans to appeal his conviction. The Kolar family lived in Weatherford, Texas. The family consisted of James Craig Kolar, known as Craig, his wife Karen, their 2 daughters, 18-year-old Emily and 16-year-old Lauren, and their 10-year-old son, Sean. Craig and Karen had been together for many years. They met when Craig was in his final year of an engineering degree at Kansas State University, and Karen was in her first year. Both were ambitious, bright students, and shared many common interests. Friends described them as the couple everyone admired, believing they would be successful after graduation. Soon after, they married and had their first daughter, Emily. In 1999, Craig received an offer to become the utility director of Weatherford, Texas. It was a well-paying and respected position, offering the family new opportunities. The Kaylas settled into a comfortable home and had 2 more children, Lauren and Sean. Neighbors saw them as a cornerstone of the community, always involved and welcoming to newcomers. Karen often baked cakes and prepared food for others. Emily attended the St. Louis College of Pharmacy, while Lauren excelled as an honor student at Columbia High School. Both teens were also in a band, playing and singing, frequently showcasing their talents around town. Neighbors often said that, as cliché as it seemed, they truly embodied the ideal all-American family, and many people admired them. However, everything was not as perfect as it appeared. One day, Karen's sister Lynn received an unexpected call. Karen wanted to confide in her about the true state of their marriage. She told Lynn that over the years Craig had changed. He had started giving her curfews and an allowance, which she supervised and scrutinized, demanding to see receipts for all of her purchases, even everyday things like food. He would demand sex every night at 8 p.m. exactly, and everything she did in the house had a timer on it. She said she did everything he asked to keep the peace, but things were getting worse and she felt trapped and scared. Karen told her sister she wanted to look for an outlet, something that was just hers that he couldn't control. She decided to join a local gym around the children's school hours and Craig being at work. Friends said that she was soon there so much and keen to learn, she was eventually hired as a fitness instructor. A completely different career path, but something she was excited to do. To her surprise, when Craig found out she had been going, he approved, telling her as long as she was home on time to look after the children, there would be no issues. One day at the gym, Karen bumped into Sonny Rees, another personal trainer. From the get-go, the pair were inseparable. They had a lot in common and spent all their shifts together. Before long, a romantic relationship developed, and the couple began an affair. Lynn said that she felt like her sister was so mentally beaten down at that point. When she found someone that seemed to really care about her and didn't want to control her, the relationship just fell together naturally. Karen knew she had to come clean and tell Craig everything. To her total shock, Craig did not seem to have an issue with it. Far from it, in fact. He encouraged it and started messaging Sonny, sending her flowers and asking her for a threesome. People say he saw it as an opportunity to spice up their marriage and sex life. He told Karen he didn't have any problem with it as long as he was included and she didn't leave him. But Karen and Sonny wanted no part of the throuple he was suggesting. They wanted it to just be them. Craig was embarrassed, and now he knew there was no chance of bringing Sonny into the marriage. He wanted her out completely and the affair to stop. But Karen and Sonny continued to see each other, and it seemed that Karen was now well and truly out of the marriage. After a few months, Craig decided the best way to put a stop to it was to move the family out of town. He started looking for a career change elsewhere that would allow this to happen. He got another job in Columbia, Missouri, one that saw him become the highest paid employee in the city. And in June 2008, the family all moved out there. Craig hoped that things would return to normal, and as Karen and Sonny were now almost 700 miles apart, he felt confident the affair would come to an end. But it didn't. Karen and Sonny's relationship continued long distance. They would email and call and text each other, and sneak visits halfway where they could. Safe to say Karen and Craig's marriage was now in a very bad and toxic place. For New Year's Eve, the Cullas attended a party back in Weatherford. Many neighbors were in attendance, including Sonny. At various points during the party, some guests saw Sonny and Karen together, and it was glaringly obvious that something was going on. It had gone from being a secret between Craig, Karen, and Sonny to a very public and open thing. Craig was mortified, and a huge fight broke out between him and Karen, one that carried on as soon as they left. Karen said Craig pushed her so hard she smashed her head on the street. Friends said it was awful. The atmosphere had soured and everyone was talking about Craig and Karen. A matter of days later, Karen told Craig she was filing for a divorce, started the legal proceedings, and moved into the spare room. Craig spent hours calling Karen's family and friends, one day asking them to convince her not to go ahead with the divorce, and the next telling them she was leaving him for another woman and wanted to steal all his money and take the children. Sunny started contacting Craig directly, telling him to leave Karen alone and that she was never happy with him anyway. As March 2009 rolled around, things escalated even more, and after another fight became physical, Craig was arrested. He told police that he had hugged Karen tightly and that she had resisted. Karen said he had violently grabbed her, giving her bruises. She gave a statement which read, "Over time, it has become apparent that Craig is controlling. I have learned along the way that he is capable of using force. The issues vary, but I figured out how to keep things from becoming ugly. When money was a problem, I wouldn't tell him what things, groceries, clothing, etc. cost. When it was about sex, I decided it was easier to give him what he wanted every night than to refuse. On occasions I would refuse. He has been known to be forceful and mean. I'm afraid it will escalate so far that someone is going to be seriously hurt." She pressed charges, and she and the children moved out of the house completely. People said this was when Craig became even more reclusive and erratic. He no longer wanted anything to do with Lauren and Emily, and only wanted to see his son Sean, saying he felt his daughters had failed him by taking their mother's side. This was made even worse when Lauren and Emily said they accepted Sunny and were happy to see their mother happy. Craig was enraged. He referred to his daughters as rotting corpses. Friends said that he started stalking Karen and spying on her, getting into the house to install cameras, and hacking into her emails. Police were then called to the house again when Karen found out that Craig had slashed her car tires and was ripping out cables from outside the house. Craig soon started slipping at work, choosing to show his colleagues family albums over and over, and leaving work unannounced to see what Karen was doing. Given everything that was going on, Craig's manager Bill quietly asked him to resign in September of 2009. This had affected his focus on the department in a way that is not likely to change in the near future. His boss said. Craig was paid 2 months' salary and 1 month of severance. And with any other job prospects looking unlikely, Craig moved back in with his parents. As they were now legally separated, he still owed Karen over $3,000 a month in child support. Flash forward to Thanksgiving 2009, and Karen, Emily, Lauren, and Sunny spent the holidays at Lynn's house. 10-year-old Sean, however, spent it with Craig. But Karen wanted all her children and Sunny to visit her grandmother Dorothy during the holiday period too. So the next day she went over to pick Sean up and make the trip over. 89-year-old Dorothy lived in a quiet little farmhouse in a city of less than 1,000 people, Burlingame, Kansas. Despite Karen and Craig's many arguments and fights about the affair, a contentious pending divorce, questions about where the children would live, and issues with finances, Karen said she was hopeful that a resolution would soon be found. Craig was just days away from going to court in regards to the incident several months earlier, and a hearing had been scheduled for January to start going through the divorce. As soon as the holiday period was over, everybody was optimistic that things might start to move forward more amicably. Saturday, November 29, 2009. Deputy Sheriff Nathan Perling was finishing up some paperwork in his office when a call came in about a suspicious vehicle in Burlingame. It was just after 6 p.m., and the neighbor reported that a small truck was speeding around near their house. They had watched as the man pulled up, exited the vehicle, and started walking down the road. The couple then saw him come back, carrying a large object that they could not identify. Thinking he was stealing, they grabbed a flashlight and headed outside to confront him. He placed the object in the back seat, got back inside, and drove off just as they approached him. Deputy Perling set off to see what was going on, but just a couple of minutes later another call came in over the radio. It was coming from the same area, but this time it was far more alarming. No sooner had they received this harrowing call when a third person called in. They had opened their front door to find a 10-year-old child crying and asking for help. It was Sean Kayla. He said he needed help at Dorothy White's house as there had been a shooting. Officers said they knew it was going to be a bad scene, but nothing quite prepared them for what they would ultimately find. When they entered the home, the first person they found was 89-year-old Dorothy. She was bleeding profusely on the kitchen floor and had been shot several times. She was still alive, but barely. They then found Karen Kayla in the dining area. She had been shot twice and she was already dead. 18-year-old Emily was found behind the couch in the lounge and had also been shot twice, with the second shot likely paralyzing her instantly. She too was deceased, and police determined she was likely trying to hide as the gunman was inside. Deputy Sheriff Perling then heard a faint voice calling for help from the upstairs. It was Lauren. Just like Dorothy, she was alive but only just. As Dorothy and Lauren were taken away, Lauren turned to an officer and said, "Craig." He said, "Who's that?" "My dad," she said. Dorothy identified Craig as the shooter as well. Tragically, Lauren succumbed to her injuries first and was pronounced dead shortly after getting to the hospital. Dorothy was still fighting for her life, but sadly it wasn't looking hopeful. There was one more person left to have been there, Sean. And little did the authorities realize he had witnessed a lot. Sean said he had been cleaning some old coins that he and Karen had found. As the two of them were stood at the sink, Craig entered the house via the back door holding a rifle and shot at Karen. Sean said he ducked down and just ran as fast as he could to get out the back door. He then ran around to the front door, hoping to get back in and get to a phone. He carefully opened the door, hearing more shots ring out as he did so. He saw Craig walking around, and he closed the door and ran for help instead. Police had already put out an alert to try and locate Craig. A resident then spotted someone abandoning their vehicle in the middle of nowhere and running down a deserted road. She called in with the tip. They found the vehicle, and it matched the description of the one the neighbors had seen earlier that night, and felt confident it was Craig's. A search of the vehicle found more ammunition and some unopened anxiety medications. A backpack was also found with some soap, towels, toilet paper, cotton balls, and some canned food. But Craig was nowhere to be found. After 8 hours of searching, Craig Kolar was finally located. It was now about 7 a.m. and he was wandering on the side of the road, looking confused, lost, and disheveled. He knew it was coming and turned to the officers and said, "I'm the guy you're looking for." He told them that he was armed with a revolver as well as some pocket knives. They also found $100 in cash, some gloves, a flashlight, and a hunting bag. He was arrested without incident and taken to the station. Craig was fairly open and told the detectives a lot. He also told him about the New Year's Eve party and how the pair would sneak visits out of town. He said he was particularly upset when he realized that his daughters not only approved, but were traveling with Karen to meet Sonny as well. Craig Kolar was charged with first-degree murder and aggravated burglary. His bail was set at $10 million just after 4 p.m. on December 1st. Dorothy White sadly passed away too. In December 2010, he had his preliminary trial where he entered a plea of insanity, the only defense against capital murder. His lawyers claimed that he had had a mental breakdown due to Karen's affair. They said this, coupled with the loss of his job and having to move in with his parents, had only added fuel to the fire. They said that the unopened medication in his car, ongoing erratic behavior, and the fact he did not attempt to cover up what he had done was evidence that he was not of a sound state of mind, that his plea of insanity was fair. In 1995, the state of Kansas passed a law which revoked the traditional insanity defense. The new law stated that defendants could no longer argue that, because of mental health issues, they were incapable of deciding right from wrong. Instead, defendants suffering from mental health issues were still legally responsible for a crime, unless these mental health issues prevented them from forming an intent to commit or act with premeditation. His defense team argued that his mental health issues were so severe that it proved he had not premeditated anything. It was a total snap in that moment. At the time of the murders, his lawyer said that he was suffering from depression, hallucinations, and had obsessive-compulsive, narcissistic, and histrionic personality disorders. But the prosecution argued that it was definitely premeditated. And his behavior over the last year especially showed that this was all just building up to what he ultimately wanted to do, which was kill his wife and likely anyone else that stood in the way of that. Their expert psychiatrist stated that while Craig had clinical depression, he was still capable of planning the murders. They also pointed to the fact that Craig had not killed their son Sean, even though he was stood right there, showing this was a conscious decision. This was not someone that was out of control and had snapped in the moment. And after this, they brought in their star witness, Sean Kolar, who was now 12 years old. And one can only imagine how difficult this must have been for him. He appeared via a video link to bravely tell everybody what had happened. People in the court said that Sean was clear, concise, and unwavering, a child far more mature than his years. My dad came through the door and shot my mom. I just heard her collapse on the floor from the shot. I just caught a glimpse. I think she was holding her leg, Sean recalled. Some people in the courtroom said that the pictures of the crime scene were so bad they physically had to look away, with some even crying. The prosecution spoke about the many allegations of abuse and controlling behaviors, and said this, again, proved his intention to hurt was always there. And when he finally lost complete control when they all moved out, is when things escalated even more. Sunny Rees also testified. She described Karen and Craig's relationship as very abusive, saying she wanted to protect Karen from him. She also said that Craig was more than happy for her and Karen to start a relationship and showed no signs of being bothered by it, until he had to let Karen go. But she acknowledged that she had no physical evidence to prove this. It was all what she remembered and what she had heard from Karen. On August 25, 2011, after just 2 hours, the jury had reached a unanimous verdict. Craig Taylor was found guilty of capital murder, and his pleas of insanity were not believed. This meant he would face the death penalty or life without parole. There were many victim impact statements given. Sean gave a small statement too and said, "I do not want my dad to receive the death penalty because it would be hard on my grandparents. I do not want my whole family gone." After this, another week would pass while everyone waited to hear the results of the sentencing. Upon hearing he was sentenced to death, those in the courtroom said Craig Kolar had no reaction. No remorse, no sadness, and no regret. The prosecutor said he only ever seemed to look proud of himself, often smirking and muttering sarcastic comments. As he exited the courtroom to begin his time, he shouted to his mother and father, "Take care of Sean so he's not raised by a bunch of freaks." While on death row, Craig started writing letters to various people, including the lead prosecutor. He still showed no remorse, instead saying he felt a sense of relief for what had happened as he was able to free Sean. His team appealed to the Kansas Supreme Court, citing numerous complaints, including the belief that there had been misconduct on the jury. They also stated that his mental health and insanity plea had not been taken into consideration. One judge said, "Kansas, unlike many states, will not wholly exonerate a defendant on the ground that his illness prevented him from recognizing his criminal act as morally wrong." Another judge added that contrary to Kolar's view, Kansas takes account of mental health of both trial and sentencing. It has just not adopted the particular insanity defense Kolar would like. His appeal was denied. With this ruling, Craig Kolar had now exhausted his direct appeals, but further appeals were still possible. And in January 2023, another appeal was lodged, which might be his last chance. Lynn and Sunny started organized runs in Weatherford in honor of Karen to raise money for victims of domestic violence. And the community often comes together to remember the family and all the lives that were lost that night. According to sources, Sean went into the care of the state for a while before going to live with his grandmother and grandfather. He graduated high school and now works in Kansas. It was a case that left a community shocked and hurting. 3 generations snatched away in a matter of minutes. And for Sean, who not only lost his mother, sisters, and great-grandmother in the most awful way, but witnessed it all as well, and then essentially lost his father too. It is incomprehensibly heartbreaking. How he has come through it all despite everything is remarkable, and a testament to his strength and perseverance against so many odds. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.